Hello, here we are. We're going to pick it up at 1 Samuel 23. We're going to remember that Saul had all the priests in Ahimelech was the priest who supplied bread and Goliath's sword to David as David was running away from Saul's kingdom. And Doeg the Edomite overheard everything that was happening and told Saul. So Saul had Doeg the Edomite put to death Ahimelech, that priest who had no idea David was running away, all of Ahimelech's family, and all of the other priests. One person escaped in Ahimelech's family, and that was Abiathar. And he brought with him an ephod, which is that thing that the priests wear over their robes that has the 12 stones of the 12 tribes of Israel represented, okay? So David is hiding, the last we heard, in the caves of Adullam, okay? So let's pick it up here at 1 Samuel 23, okay? When David was told, look, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah, that's a town, or city, Keilah, and are looting the threshing floors, he inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go and attack these Philistines? The Lord answered him, go attack the Philistines and save Keilah. But David's men said to him, here in Judah we're afraid. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the Philistine forces? So they're saying to him, we're already scared. Now you're going to ask us to go fight. We're going to be really scared. Once again, David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered him, go down to Keilah, for I'm going to give the Philistines into your hand. So he would be able to share that with them, okay, so that they wouldn't be so afraid. So David and his men went to Keilah, fought the Philistines, and carried off their livestock. He inflicted heavy losses on the Philistines and saved the people of Keilah. Now Abiathar, son of Ahimelech, had brought the ephod down with him when he fled to David at Keilah. Okay, so Abiathar sought David out and ran to him because he wasn't safe in Saul's kingdom anymore. Okay, Saul was told that David had gone to Keilah, and he said, God's delivered him into my hands, for David has imprisoned himself by entering a town with gates and bars. And Saul called up all his forces for battle to go down to Keilah to besiege David and his men. When David learned that Saul was plotting against him, he said to Abiathar the priest, bring the ephod. David said, Lord God of Israel, your servant has heard definitely that Saul plans to come to Keilah and destroy the town on account of me. Will the citizens of Keilah surrender me to him? Will Saul come down as your servant has heard? Lord God of Israel, tell your servant. And the Lord said, he will. Again, David asked, will the citizens of Keilah surrender me and my men to Saul? And the Lord said, they will. So David and his men, about 600 in number, left Keilah and kept moving from place to place. When Saul was told that David had escaped from Keilah, he didn't go there. David stayed in the wilderness strongholds and in the hills of the desert of Ziph. That's Z-I-P-H. Day after day, Saul searched for him, but God didn't give David into his hands. While David was at Horesh in the desert of Ziph, he learned that Saul had come out to take his life. And Saul's son Jonathan went to David at Horesh and helped him find strength in God. Don't be afraid, he said. My father Saul will not lay a hand on you. You will be king over Israel, and I will be second to you. Even my father Saul knows this. The two of them made a covenant before the Lord. Then Jonathan went home, but David remained at Horesh. Thank God for good friends, huh? The Ziphites went up to Saul at Gibeah and said, is not David hiding among us in the strongholds at Horesh on the hill of Hachilah, south of Jeshimon? Now, your majesty, come down whenever it pleases you to do so, and we'll be responsible for giving him into your hands. Saul replied, the Lord bless you for your concern for me. Go and get more information. Find out where David usually goes and who's seen him there. They tell me he's very crafty. Find out about all the hiding places he uses and come back to me with definite information. Then I'll go with you. If he's in the area, I will track him down among all the clans of Judah. So they set out, went to Ziph ahead of Saul. Now David and his men were in the desert of Maon, in the Arabah, south of Jeshimon. Saul and his men began the search, and when David was told about it, he went down to the rock and stayed in the desert of Maon. When Saul heard this, he went into the desert of Maon in pursuit of David. Saul was going along one side of the mountain, and David and his men were on the other side, hurrying to get away from Saul. As Saul and his forces were closing in on David and his men to capture them, a messenger came to Saul saying, "Come quickly, the Philistines are raiding the land." Then Saul broke off his pursuit of David and went to meet the Philistines. This is why they call this place Selah Hamalekoth. And David went up from there and lived in the strongholds of En-Gedi. All right, 1 Samuel 24. After Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, "David's in the desert of En-Gedi." So Saul took 3,000 able young men from all Israel and set out to look for David and his men near the crags of the wild goats, and that's in capitals. He came to the sheep pens along the way. A cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. So he went in there to go to the bathroom. David and his men were far back in the cave. The men said, "This is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, 'I'll give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish.'" Then David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Afterward, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord." With these words, David sharply rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. And Saul left the cave and went on his way. He doesn't know how close he came, huh? Then David went out of the cave and called out to Saul, "My lord, the king!" When Saul looked behind him, David bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. He said to Saul, "Why do you listen when men say David is bent on harming you? This day you've seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lay my hand on my Lord because he's the Lord's anointed. See, my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off the corner of your robe, but did not kill you. See that there is nothing in my hand to indicate that I am guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. I have not wronged you, but you're hunting me down to take my life. May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge the wrongs you've done to me, but my hand will not touch you. As the old saying goes, from evildoers come evil deeds, so my hand will not touch you. Against whom has the king of Israel come out? Who are you pursuing? A dead dog? A flea? May the Lord be our judge and decide between us. May he consider my cause and uphold it. May he vindicate me by delivering me from your hand." When David finished saying this, Saul asked, "Is that your voice, David, my son?" And he wept aloud. "You're more righteous than I," he said. "You've treated me well, but I've treated you badly. You've just now told me about the good you did to me. The Lord delivered me into your hands, but you did not kill me. When a man finds his enemy, does he let him get away unharmed? May the Lord reward you well for the way you treated me today. I know that you will surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands. Now swear to me by the Lord that you will not kill off my descendants or wipe out my name from my father's family." So David gave his oath to Saul. Then Saul returned home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. 1 Samuel 25. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him. Samuel was the prophet that anointed David and Saul, firstly. And they buried him at his home in Ramah. Then David moved down into the desert of Paran. A certain man in Maon who had property there at Carmel was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband was surly and mean in his dealings. He was a Calebite. While David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, 'Long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that's yours.' Now, I hear that it's sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, we didn't mistreat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your own servants, and they will tell you. Therefore, be favorable towards my men, since we come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them." So he's asking for provision, and apparently sheep shearing time is a festive time. When David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name. Then they waited. Nabal answered David's servants, "Who's this David? Who's this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I've slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where?" David's men turned around and went back. When they arrived, they reported every word. David said to his men, "Each of you strap on your sword." So they did, and David strapped his on as well. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. One of the servants told Abigail, Nabal's wife, "David sent messengers from the wilderness to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They didn't mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. Night and day, they were a wall around us the whole time we were herding our sheep near them." So this is one of Nabal's servants telling his wife Abigail, "Your husband was just really rude to this guy who was protecting us with his men," okay? And you watch what happens, okay, for that little bit of surly nastiness. And I want this to be a lesson to everybody who is not kind, okay? You watch what happens, all right? Kindness goes a long way, and you should always employ it, okay? If you're not being kind, then you're going to get what you're going to get, okay? And that's in the little things, too. Heed my words, really. We're really short on kindness, and we always have been. But in these days, it's really bad, okay? Here we go. "Night and day they were a wall around us the whole time we were herding our sheep near them." This is the servant to Abigail. "Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster's hanging over our master and his whole household. He's such a wicked man that no one can talk to him." Abigail acted quickly. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain, and seahs is S-E-A-H-S, 100 cakes of raisins, 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Then she told her servants, "Go on ahead, I'll follow you." But she didn't tell her husband, Nabal. So basically, she was told, "Your husband is bringing trouble on our heads because he's been extremely rude to someone who's been extremely good to us. And all they're asking for are some provisions." So she's whipping some provisions together to avert the disaster because of her husband's nasty tongue, okay? As she came riding her donkey into a mountain ravine, there were David and his men descending towards her, and she met them. David had just said, "It's been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness so that nothing of his was missing. He's paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David." And make sure you're kind even if someone hasn't watched over your belongings, okay? Just be kind. "May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him." So this is what he's saying when Abigail comes down into the ravine. This is exactly what he's saying, and then they look, and there she is. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord, and let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. Please pay no attention, my lord, to that wicked man Nabal. He's just like his name. His name means fool. Wasn't I talking about fools today on my site? Yes, I was. And folly goes with him. And as for me, your servant, I didn't see the men my Lord sent. And now, my Lord, as surely as the Lord your God lives and as you live, since the Lord's kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, may your enemies and all who are intent on harming my Lord be like Nabal, fools. And let this gift, which your servants brought to my Lord, be given to the men who follow you. Please forgive your servant's presumption. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord, because you fight the Lord's battles, and no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my Lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living. She's prophesying here to David. By the Lord your God, because who knows if she knows that Saul's chasing him or what's going on. I mean, she didn't know that David was in the fields protecting her servants, her and Nabal's servants. So who knows? She's prophesying, okay? For the life of my Lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God, but the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. When the Lord has fulfilled for my Lord every good thing he promised concerning him and has appointed him ruler over Israel, my Lord will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or of having avenged himself, meaning on my crappy husband. And when the Lord your God has brought my Lord success, remember your servant. David said to Abigail, praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who's kept me from harming you, if you hadn't come quickly to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak. Then David accepted from her hand what she'd brought him and said, go home in peace. I've heard your words and granted your request. When Abigail went to Nabal, he was in the house holding a banquet like that of a king. He was in high spirits and very drunk, so she told him nothing at all until daybreak. Then in the morning when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things, and his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal and he died. I'm going to take a break here and tell you something, okay? And don't think the little things don't matter. What's being brought to my mind is a girl I knew from my youth, okay? I met her in San Francisco. We were all in like 19 and 20 years old. I knew her for years and years. She was a Facebook friend. And within the last 5 years, she and I used to talk about antique jewelry, and we had these things in common. Well, one day I was talking to her, and I must have brought up the Lord or mentioned the Lord. And, I'm very careful. I don't, just come in like gangbusters talking about the Lord and making everybody uncomfortable. There was an open door, so I talked to her. Well, her, because, I'm always telling you, look for those open doors, listen for them. If there's no open door, then don't just throw Jesus on the floor in front of people. Wait till the door cracks open. So the door cracked open, and I started to tell her something. And her two grown children, all of a sudden just jumped on me and ripped me into pieces. And she allowed them to do it. She just sat back, didn't say a word, and they ripped me into pieces where by the time I left, I was in tears. They didn't know I was in tears, but it was just one of those situations. It was sort of like when I first got saved and a couple of my friends were mocking me and I had to run into the bathroom and cry. I mean, sometimes it really hurts. So I just, because she didn't say anything to stop them from their massacre of me, and there was no saying anything. It was so ugly and vicious and foul, because in these days, people are so foul and disrespectful. I just got off her site. I don't know if I blocked her, but I was so hurt and offended. I thought, wow, they really just blew it. I don't know if I blocked her. I don't think that I did, but I must have unfriended her or something. I don't know. It was too weird. And I remember another very hypocritical friend all of a sudden blocked me. She was a mutual friend. Like, screw you, Autumn. And I just thought, wow, I am really finding out who friends are here. It was just a very painful episode. Well, I moved on, and as I am wont to do, and I forgot about it. And about a year later, if that, this thing pops up from another friend who's mutual that says she's dead. And I was horrified. I said, what? She's dead? Well, apparently very soon after that very ugly episode where she allowed her children to murder me, she left their father and ran across the country from San Francisco to New York City with an old friend that she claimed she was in love with, and she abandoned the whole family. And while she was living in New York, she got a cut on her thigh, just a small cut. And it apparently wouldn't heal. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, she had a heart attack and a stroke or something because she got septicemia. She got septic poison. Her blood turned to poison. She got poison and she died. And I'm telling you this to tell you that you always honor God's people. Doesn't matter how you feel about their Lord. You keep your mouth shut and you honor God's people. Now, am I saying that God killed her because of what she... No, I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that it didn't help her any. Okay? It didn't help her any. I would never be so vain to think that God would strike someone dead for being rude to me. Okay? So please know I'm not saying that. But it was very weird. Okay? And today I had another experience like that. I was talking to a very young friend that's been my friend for about 5 years. And she's very young. She couldn't be more than 30 for sure. And she has a different stance on abortion. So, she knows I don't agree with her. So we were talking and I humbled myself and I shared a couple things with her. And it took a couple days, but she came back at me so horribly. And it reminded me of this girl and her children. And she was calling me disgusting and all these, just like, it was filthy. And to do this to someone, what if I wasn't a Christian and I was just 65 like I am? I mean, do you talk to older people like that? I guess this generation does. But not only was that shocking, but she started to really get vicious about my God. And that does not fly with me. That's when it's bye-bye. So she was unfriended. And I'm bringing this up because you look at someone like Nabal, who's incredibly vicious to a godly person, David. And because David is godly, he was protecting Nabal's men out in the field. Whether Nabal knew it or not, it was a very nice thing to do. And when he was told, he said, I don't know who he is, screw him. Okay? And he's dead now. The Lord struck him dead. I mean, you don't ever talk to God's people like that. It's not going to be looked kindly on. And if it's your time to go, God's going to have you go. It may not be specifically for that one thing. I'm sure it's a culmination of a lot of things that you've been doing. But I'm warning you, don't ever talk to God's servants rudely, unkindly, call them names. Don't do it. You are playing with fire, because when you mess with God's servants, you mess with the Lord himself, because we're his children. Okay, now I know I'm speaking mostly to Christians here, but there's probably people that listen that are not Christians yet. If you're here, then most likely you will come to know the Lord at some point, because the Lord is calling you, or you wouldn't be here. But I'm just telling you, be very careful, and don't, if you're a Christian, don't let people speak to you like that. When they do, bow out gracefully, no matter how much it hurts, because you love them. But just get out of the way. Get out of the way of the sinner. And we're going to read that in Psalms chapter 1. Okay? So this is what I mean about kindness. You be kind no matter what, okay, when we're talking to people, because you never know if within a year you're going to be taking your last breath. I think maybe that's a better description, not like, oh, she was rude to Autumn, a year later she was dead. Well, that is what happened, but most likely she was rude to Autumn and just didn't realize how close she was to her own death. And that's tragic. And she like hated the Lord. So, I have no opinion on where she is now because I don't know. It's not my business. That's between her and God, okay? But it's better, the scripture says, it's better to be a live dog than a dead lion. And we're looking at Nabal here, who's feasting like a king and has all these servants. He was extremely wealthy, remember? 3,000 goats or what have you. Shearing sheep, big festival time. He's dead, like a stone. He just fell down like a stone, and 10 days later, the Lord zapped him like a fly, and he's gone. Think about what you're doing is what I'm saying. Always think, okay? I'm not perfect. I know you know that, okay? We all make mistakes, but if you do, repent, okay? So I'm not even sure. I know why I told you, but I'm not even sure if it ties in. I just felt led to tell you that, okay? All right. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Praise be to the Lord who's upheld my cause against Nabal for treating me with contempt." David claimed it. David knew who he was. And all of us, we're all Davids, okay? Whether we're leaders or not, we're loved just like God loved David. All right, I'm going to read that again. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Praise be to the Lord who has upheld my cause against Nabal for treating me with contempt." That was his crime against David, treating him with contempt. That means being unkind, being nasty, which is what the woman did to me with her children. She sat back and watched them tear me apart, and I couldn't believe it. It was so awful. And this young girl today did the same thing. And I just left graciously, and I thought, uh-oh, woe unto this young woman. But I'm certainly not going to stick around where my Lord is being dishonored like that, okay? So be careful. Don't ever take a servant of the Lord for granted or treat them like dirt, because they're serving the Most High God. All right. He's kept his servant from doing wrong and has brought Nabal's wrongdoing down on his own head. So he kept David through Abigail from avenging himself and killing everybody, killing all of Nabal's men, and then killed Nabal too. Then David sent word to Abigail asking her to become his wife. So one rude comment from Nabal and he's dead, and David has now got his wife too for his own. You could lose everything being rude to the wrong person. His servants went to Carmel and said to Abigail, "David sent us to take you to become his wife." She bowed down with her face to the ground and said, "I'm your servant and am ready to serve you and wash the feet of my Lord's servants." Abigail quickly got on a donkey and, attended by her 5 female servants, went with David's messengers and became his wife. David had also married Ahinoam of Jezreel, and they both were his wives, but Saul had given his daughter Michal, David's wife, to Paltiel, son of Laish, who was from Galim. Okay, so Michal was the wife that was left back in Saul's kingdom when David fled, and Saul took her and gave her to Paltiel. Okay, last chapter for the night, 1 Samuel 26. The Ziphites went to Saul at Gibeah and said, "Is not David hiding on the hill of Hachilah, which faces Jeshimon?" So Saul went down to the desert of Ziph with his 3,000 select troops, Israelite troops, to search there for David. Saul made his camp beside the road on the hill of Hachilah facing Jeshimon, but David stayed in the wilderness. When he saw that Saul had followed him there, he sent out scouts and learned that Saul had definitely arrived. I have been told that this whole drama took 14 years for David to get to the kingdom. 14 years of hiding in caves, okay? Just a side note. Then David set out and went to the place where Saul had camped. He saw where Saul and Abner, son of Ner, the commander of the army, had lain down. Saul was lying inside the camp with the army encamped around him. David then asked Ahimelech the Hittite and Abishai, son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, who will go down into the camp with me to Saul. I'll go with you, said Abishai. So David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there was Saul lying asleep inside the camp with his spear stuck in the ground near his head. Abner and the soldiers were lying around him. Abishai said to David, "Today God's delivered your enemy into your hands. Now let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of the spear. I won't strike him twice." But David said to Abishai, "Don't destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? As surely as the Lord lives," he said, "the Lord himself will strike him." So even though the Lord isn't on Saul's side anymore, he still anointed him to be king many years before. So he is the Lord's anointed. This is what David's referring to. The Lord himself will strike him, or his time will come and he'll die, or he'll go into battle and perish. But the Lord forbid that I should lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. Now get the spear and water jug that are near his head and let's go. So David took the spear and water jug near Saul's head and they left. No one saw or knew about it, nor did anyone wake up. They were all sleeping because the Lord had put them into a deep sleep. Then David crossed over to the other side and stood on top of the hill some distance away. There was a wide space between them. He called out to the army and to Abner, son of Ner, "Aren't you going to answer me, Abner?" Abner replied, "Who are you who calls to the king?" David said, "You're a man, aren't you? And who's like you in Israel? Why didn't you guard your lord the king? Someone came to destroy your lord the king. What you've done is not good. As surely as the Lord lives, you and your men must die because you didn't guard your master, the Lord's anointed. Look around you. Where are the king's spear and water jug that were near his head?" Saul recognized David's voice and said, "Is that your voice, David, my son?" David replied, "Yes, it is, my lord the king." And he added, "Why is my lord pursuing his servant? What have I done, and what wrong am I guilty of? Now let my lord the king listen to his servant's words. If the Lord has incited you against me, then may he accept an offering. If, however, people have done it, may they be cursed before the Lord. They've driven me today from my share in the Lord's inheritance and have said, 'Go serve other gods.' Now, do not let my blood fall to the ground far from the presence of the Lord. The King of Israel has come out to look for a flea, as one hunts a partridge in the mountains." Then Saul said, "I've sinned. Come back, David, my son. Because you considered my life precious today, I will not try to harm you again. Surely I've acted like a fool and have been terribly wrong." "Here is the king's spear," David answered. "Let one of your young men come over and get it. The Lord rewards everyone for their righteousness and faithfulness. The Lord delivered you into my hands today, but I would not lay a hand on the Lord's anointed." So even be kind to people that are after you. "As surely as I valued your life today, so may the Lord value my life and deliver me from all trouble." Still David talking. Then Saul said to David, "May you be blessed, David, my son. You'll do great things and surely triumph." So David went on his way and Saul returned home. Just be kind, okay? You don't have to be treated terribly. That's when you bow out graciously. But even to those who are terrible to you, don't fight with them. Just walk away, okay? I love you very much. Tomorrow we'll pick it up with 1 Samuel chapter 27. We will probably just do the rest of the book. I believe there are 31 chapters. So we'll do 27, 5 chapters. We'll see. I love you. See you tomorrow. Don't forget to pray, okay? It's very important. I'm praying for you. When you pray, you talk to God like you're talking to me or your brother or your mother or your father. Hello, dear Jesus, I'm coming to you right now because I just have to tell you, Lord, I'm so upset with blah, 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 blah. I don't know what to do about this. Can you help me? That's how you pray. This is a person listening to you. Granted, he's not like us. We are made in his image, so we have an idea of what type of being he is. But, I mean, he's not like us, okay? But you can talk to him like you're talking to another human being. He is a person with a personality, and he loves you. And he wants you to come to him as a father, that you would go to him as his son, okay? Or daughter. I love you, and I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.